The Mafia boss couldn't eat for months. Everything changed when a plus-size maid arrived. The plate came back untouched. Again. Raymond Conti pushed it to the edge of the table without looking at it, the way a man pushes aside something that has offended him simply by existing. The food was good. Everyone in the house knew it was good. The cook, a nervous young man named Philip, had spent 3 hours on it. Braised lamb, roasted garlic, a sauce that had been reduced twice to get the depth exactly right. It smelled like something a person would cross a room for. Raymond did not cross the room. Raymond barely left his chair. He sat at the head of a dining table built for 14 people, alone, in a house that had 42 rooms and 11 staff members, and a silence so thick it pressed against the walls. The Conti estate sat on 12 acres outside the city, behind a gate that nobody entered without an appointment, and nobody left without Raymond knowing about it. For 23 years, that gate had been the border between Raymond's world and everything else. Inside it, he had been absolute. Inside it, things ran the way he decided they would run. But inside it, for the past 4 months, Raymond Conti had not eaten a real meal. Not since Claire died. His physician had given the condition a name that Raymond had immediately forgotten. Something with words like complicated and prolonged and grief-related. Raymond had listened to the man speak, nodded twice, and then told him he could leave. He did not want a name for it. A name suggested it was something that could be treated, something with a beginning and a middle and a tidy end. Raymond did not believe in tidy ends. He had seen too many of them. What he knew was this. Food had no taste anymore. Not no flavor exactly. The flavors were there. He could identify them if he tried. The way you can read a word without understanding it. Salt, fat, acid, heat. His tongue registered all of it, and sent the information to some part of his brain that had gone offline. And nothing came back. No want, no pleasure, no reason to continue. He had lost 19 pounds. His tailor, a discreet man named George who had worked with Raymond for 15 years, had taken in 3 suits without commenting on why. George was paid well to be discreet. Philip, the cook, had not been paid well enough. He resigned on a Tuesday morning, leaving a short note on the kitchen counter that said he was very sorry and wished Mr. Conti well. The note was polite and final, and Raymond could not blame him. Cooking for a man who tasted nothing was its own kind of cruelty. The agency sent 2 replacements before the month was out. The first lasted 9 days. The second lasted 5. Both of them made the same mistake. They tried harder. Elaborate dishes, carefully plated arrangements, desserts that took skill and time. Raymond sent everything back. The harder they tried, the more it felt like pressure. And pressure was the one thing Raymond Conti had never responded to well. His household manager, a steady woman named Margaret, who had worked at the estate for 11 years, called the agency a 3rd time. She was running out of patience with them but was too professional to say so. Send someone different, she told the woman on the phone. Not a chef. A housekeeper who can also cook. Someone practical. Someone who doesn't need to impress anyone. The agency sent Rosa Ferrante. She arrived on a Wednesday morning in mid-October, in a sensible coat the color of dark moss, carrying a canvas bag and a small potted basil plant balanced on top of it. She was 41 years old, with dark hair pulled back and a face that had lived in it, the kind of face that had learned things through experience rather than instruction. She was a full-figured woman, broad-shouldered and unhurried in the way she moved, like someone who had long ago made peace with taking up space. Margaret met her at the gate and walked her through the estate, talking the whole time in a low, efficient voice. The kitchen was here, the supply pantry was there, the staff entrance was on the east side, laundry was handled on Mondays and Thursdays. She explained the arrangement of the house, the schedule, the preferences of the other staff members. Then she stopped at the corridor that led to the dining room and lowered her voice further. About Mr. Conti, she said. Rosa waited. He lost his wife 4 months ago. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't talk much at all anymore. He hasn't been eating. Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. The last 3 people who worked this kitchen tried to make him eat. Don't do that. Don't try to make him do anything. Just do your job. Rosa looked at the corridor for a moment. Then she nodded once and went to the kitchen. She did not unpack theatrically. She did not rearrange things immediately, or announce plans. She set the basil plant on the windowsill where the light came in from the south, washed her hands, and opened the pantry to see what was there. What was there was a story. A pantry always is. There was good olive oil and cheap pasta bought at the wrong time, and an excess of canned tomatoes, and a jar of preserved lemons that someone had opened and then abandoned. There were spices that had been sitting long enough to lose their smell, and spices that were still alive, and a bag of dried lentils pushed to the very back, as though someone had been ashamed of them. Rosa stood in front of the pantry for a long time, just reading it. Then she made a list, small and neat, on the notepad she kept in her apron pocket, and she went about her day. She cleaned, not frantically, not trying to prove anything, but with the focused attention of someone who takes her work seriously. She moved through the rooms that were in use, and left the ones that were not. She did not open doors that felt like they should stay closed. She changed the linens in the rooms that needed it, polished what needed polishing, and fixed a small thing in the kitchen that had been broken for weeks but nobody had reported. A hinge on one of the lower cabinet doors that had been pulling loose. She found the screwdriver herself, tightened it herself, put the screwdriver back. At 6 in the evening she began making broth. Not for him, for herself. She had been traveling since early morning, and she was tired in the quiet way that a long day makes a person tired, and broth was what she made when she needed something to hold her from the inside. She used the good chicken bones she found in the freezer, added the preserved lemon, a handful of the good parsley, some black pepper, a little onion. She let it go low and slow on the back burner. The estate settled into its evening routines around her. The other staff had their dinner, came and went from the kitchen with nods and the careful politeness of people still deciding whether she was going to stay. Margaret stopped by once, saw the pot on the stove, and said nothing, which Rosa took as approval. By 10 o'clock, most of the house was quiet. Rosa ate her broth standing at the counter the way she liked to, reading a few pages of the book she carried in her bag, a paperback so worn that the spine had cracked and been carefully taped back together. She did not hear Raymond Conti come to the kitchen doorway. She sensed him. The way the quality of quiet in a room changes when someone enters it. She looked up, and he was standing there in the frame of the door, wearing a dark shirt and trousers, with the look of a man who had not intended to be anywhere near this room, and could not explain to himself why he was. He was in his mid-50s, tall, with the kind of face that had once been striking, and was now something harder and more interesting. He had lost weight, visibly, but he still carried himself like a man who occupied space deliberately. His eyes were dark, and they were looking at the pot on the stove. Rosa looked at him. She did not smile nervously, or stand up straighter, or say anything at all. She just looked at him the way she might look at weather through a window, acknowledging it without needing to respond to it. He said nothing. She said nothing. After a moment, he turned and walked back down the corridor. Rosa finished her broth, washed the bowl, went to bed. In the morning, the pot was empty and clean, and sitting back on the burner where she had left it. Rosa looked at the pot for a long moment. Then she put the kettle on for her morning tea, and began thinking about lunch. She did not mention the pot to anyone, not to Margaret, not to the other staff members, not to Raymond when she passed him in the east corridor that afternoon. He was on a phone call, walking, his free hand in his jacket pocket. He passed her without acknowledgement, and she moved aside without making it a performance, and that was all. But that evening she made broth again, this time with beef bones and rosemary, and a little tomato paste, a deeper version, something with weight to it. She made enough for 2. She ate her portion at the counter. She left the rest on the stove on the lowest flame. By morning it was gone again. On the 3rd night, she put a bowl on the counter beside the pot. Just a bowl. No instruction, no note, no arrangement. Just a bowl set there in case someone wanted to use it. When she came to the kitchen at 6:30 the following morning, the bowl was washed and sitting on the drying rack, and there were no traces of anything, except that someone had been very careful to leave no traces. Rosa looked at the drying rack for a moment. Then she reached up and touched the leaves of the basil plant on the windowsill to check if it needed water. It did. She watered it. Then she sat down with her tea and began writing the grocery list for the week, because there was a man in this house who was beginning to want something again, and Rosa Ferrante believed very strongly in being prepared. Raymond Conti had not been a man who lost things. That was the part no one who knew him could quite reconcile. He had navigated 30 years of difficult business in a world where difficult did not begin to cover it, and he had come through those years with his mind intact, his grip unshaken, and his position secure. He had buried partners, managed betrayals, absorbed losses that would have destroyed smaller men, and he had done all of it with a steadiness that his enemies called cold, and his allies called necessary. He had lost Claire anyway, not to any danger he could have anticipated, or any enemy he could have fought. She had gone quietly, from an illness that had announced itself in the spring, and finished its work by summer, and he had sat beside her through all of it, and held her hand, and been completely, humiliatingly helpless, in a way he had no framework for. Raymond Conti was a man built around the ability to act, to decide, to move something from one state to another through the application of will and resource. He could not will Claire to stay. No resource he had could purchase one more day. She was gone, and the world had continued, which seemed to him a kind of insult. The estate ran. His operations ran. His men came to him with problems, and he solved the problems, because the problems continued regardless of what had happened to him, because the world did not stop having problems just because Raymond Conti had lost the one person who made the weight of those problems bearable. He solved them. He took the meetings. He signed what needed to be signed, and made the calls that needed to be made. And he did not eat. Or rather, he ate the minimum that kept him functioning. Small things grabbed without thought. A piece of bread, a handful of crackers. Never at the table, never with intention, never with anything resembling appetite. The dining room felt like a room from someone else's life. The kitchen felt like a room he had no business being in. And then there was the broth. He had not gone to the kitchen on that first night with any particular purpose. He had been walking, the way he walked the estate sometimes in the late hours, when sleep refused to cooperate, moving through the dark rooms not because there was anywhere to go, but because standing still was worse. The smell had reached him in the corridor. Something simple, something that did not announce itself but that settled into the air, the way warmth settles into a cold space, gradually and without drama. He had found himself at the kitchen doorway before he made any decision to be there. The new housekeeper had been standing at the counter eating from a plain bowl, reading a battered book, and she had looked up at him with an expression that he had not been able to classify and had been thinking about, in the background of his mind, ever since. It was not surprise. It was not the nervous deference he was used to seeing from staff when he appeared unexpectedly. It was not even the careful professional neutrality that people like Margaret had perfected over years. It was simply acknowledgement. She had seen him and let him be seen without making anything of it, and then she had looked back at her book. He had gone back to his room and lain awake for an hour. Then he had gone back to the kitchen and eaten the rest of the broth standing at the stove, straight from the pot, which he had not done since he was 20 years old, and living in 2 rooms above a hardware store with nothing to his name, and everything still ahead of him. He had washed the pot carefully afterward, and the bowl, and put them back, and gone to bed, and slept for 5 hours, which was 2 more than he had managed in weeks. He did not know what to do with this information. He watched her the way he watched things he was trying to understand. Not obviously. He was not a man who stared. But he noticed. He noticed that she moved through the estate without apology. Not loudly, not aggressively, but with the settled ease of someone who did not believe she was in the way. He noticed that she fixed things without being asked to fix them. The cabinet hinge, a loose curtain rod in the east sitting room, a dripping tap in the staff bathroom that had been dripping for 6 weeks. She did not report these repairs to Margaret, or mention them in any general way. She simply fixed them and moved on. He noticed the herb garden she had quietly begun in the kitchen's south-facing window. The basil first, then parsley, then something he did not recognize that turned out, when he looked more closely one morning, to be thyme. She had replanted a struggling rosemary from the garden beds outside into a pot she had found in the utility room, and it was already looking better under her attention. He noticed that she never tried to make him eat. This was the thing that stopped him from being irritated by her presence the way he had been irritated by the presence of the cooks before her. They had all tried, in different ways. Varied menus, carefully adjusted spices, suggestions delivered through Margaret because nobody was brave enough to deliver them directly. Their effort had the opposite of its intended effect. Their trying was a weight. It reminded him, every time, that something was wrong with him, that he was a problem to be solved, a difficult situation requiring management. Rosa Ferrante made food for reasons that had nothing to do with him, and left it in places he could find it if he wanted it. He always wanted it. A week after she arrived, he came to the kitchen in the afternoon and found her making something with lentils. The kitchen smelled like cumin and slow-cooked onion, and something with an edge of something sweet that he could not identify. She had music playing very quietly from a small speaker on the counter, something instrumental with a lot of guitar. She was chopping flat-leaf parsley with the fast, easy movement of someone who has done this 10,000 times and long ago stopped thinking about it. She did not stop when he came in. She did not adjust her posture, or her pace, or the volume of the music. He sat on one of the stools at the kitchen island, which he had never done before in his own house. "What are you making?" he said. His voice came out rougher than he expected from disuse. "Lentil soup," she said, without looking up from the parsley. "I don't particularly like lentil soup." "All right," she said. She kept chopping. He sat there for another 20 minutes, watching her work, and then he ate 2 full bowls of the lentil soup when it was ready, at the kitchen counter, standing, which was not how a man of his position ate in his own house, and he did not care at all, and the soup tasted like the first real thing he had tasted in 4 months. She did not comment on this. She covered the rest of the pot and put it in the refrigerator, and went to deal with the afternoon laundry. The next morning, he came to the kitchen while she was making breakfast, not for him, for herself, eggs and toast, and sliced tomato. He came in, poured himself coffee, and stood at the counter with it. She slid a plate onto the counter beside him, not in front of him, beside him, like an option rather than a command. Eggs on toast with the tomato and a little olive oil, and some of the herbs from the window. He ate it, all of it. He drank 2 cups of coffee. He stood at the counter for 40 minutes while she tidied up around him, and neither of them said very much, and it was the most comfortable he had felt in any room in 4 months. He began to understand that what she was doing, or rather what she was not doing, was something rare. She was not managing him. She was not adjusting herself to accommodate his grief, or his silence, or his reputation, or the general weight of what Raymond Conti was understood to be in the world that knew his name. She was doing her work with her full attention, and she was allowing him, without comment, to exist nearby. He had not realized until now how exhausting it was to be around people who were always aware of who he was. His appetite returned in a way he had not expected, not all at once, not like a switch being flipped, but gradually, like a tide coming back in. First the broth, then the soup, then breakfast. Then, on a Friday evening 2 weeks after her arrival, he found himself standing in the kitchen at 7 in the evening asking, in a tone he was aware sounded more like a statement than a question, whether there was enough of whatever she was making for 2 people. She looked at the pot. She looked at him. "There will be," she said, and turned back to the stove. He set the table in the kitchen, not the dining room, the kitchen table where the staff took their meals, a round table for 6, and he put out 2 plates and 2 glasses, and did not examine why this felt correct when the dining room, with its candles and its 14 chairs and its expensive tablecloth, did not feel correct at all. She brought the food and sat down across from him, and they ate together for the first time. She told him about the herb garden, about what she wanted to plant in the spring, if she was still here in the spring, she added, without any particular weight on the qualification. He asked about the rosemary, whether it would survive being moved indoors. She said it depended on the light. He told her about the south-facing aspect of the window, how much direct sun it got in winter. She said that would probably be enough. They talked about herbs for 40 minutes, and though Raymond Conti was aware, somewhere behind his sternum, that this had nothing to do with herbs, he was also grateful that they were talking about herbs, because herbs were manageable, and the thing behind his sternum was not yet, and she seemed to understand this without his having to say it. When dinner was done, he cleared the plates. She watched him do this, and he pretended not to notice that she was watching, and she pretended not to notice that he was pretending. He said goodnight at the kitchen door. She said goodnight back. He walked to his study, sat down in the chair behind the desk, and looked at the wall for a while. For the first time in 4 months, he was thinking about tomorrow and what might be in it, rather than simply waiting for it to pass. It was a small thing, but Raymond Conti, who had learned to measure things carefully, understood that some of the smallest things were the ones that carried the most weight. He went to bed before midnight and slept without walking the estate first, which had not happened since July. In the kitchen, Rosa Ferrante washed the last of the dishes, dried them, and put them away in the right places. She watered the thyme. She turned off the kitchen light. She stood in the dark doorway for a moment, listening to the quiet of the house, which was still a heavy quiet, still a house that had known loss and not finished knowing it, but different now in some small way she could feel but not name. Then she went to her room, opened her worn paperback, and read until she fell asleep. Outside the kitchen window, the basil plant stood in the last of the moonlight, green and steady and growing. Rosa Ferrante was not a woman who made mistakes about what things were. She had been careful about this her whole life. She had learned it early, the way children learn things that the adults around them fail to teach clearly, by watching what happened when people confused one thing for another. Kindness confused for love, attention confused for permanence, a man's need confused for his intention. She had made the confusion herself, once. One time, thoroughly, in the way that a person only usually gets to do once, because the cost of doing it teaches you things that no other lesson can. His name had been Frank, and she had married him at 24, and she had loved him in the complete, surrendered way that she now thought of as a kind of courage she was no longer sure she had. He had been sick for the last 7 years of their marriage, a long, slow illness that had taken him in pieces before it took him entirely. And she had stayed and cared for him and held the life they had built together with both hands while it was shrinking. And she had not regretted any of it. Not the time, not the money, not the years she might have spent differently. What she had regretted, quietly and without telling anyone, was this. She had spent so long being the person who held things together that she had forgotten, somewhere along the way, what it felt like to want something for herself. Frank had been gone for 3 years. In those 3 years she had worked. She had been good at the work, very good, because Rosa brought her complete attention to whatever she was doing, and complete attention applied to domestic work produces visible, satisfying results. Clean rooms, functioning kitchens, small broken things made whole again. It was honest work and she was proud of it, and she had also, carefully, deliberately, made sure it was all she had. No attachments to the houses she worked in. No emotional investments in the people she worked for. She arrived, she did her job well, and when the job ended, she left cleanly and moved to the next one. She had understood the Conti estate would require more care than usual. Margaret had been honest with her at the start. Not fully honest. She had edited the weight of the situation, but honest enough. A grieving man. A house that had gone quiet. A kitchen that nobody had managed to hold. What she had not anticipated was Raymond Conti himself. Not his reputation, which she had looked up in the way that a sensible person looks things up before going to work in an unfamiliar place. Not the size of his presence in the house, which was significant even when he was absent from a room, the way large weather is present in the sky, even when the rain hasn't started yet. What she had not anticipated was the quality of his attention, the way he watched things, the way he listened when she spoke about small, practical things, with a focus that made her feel as though whatever she was saying mattered more than she had intended it to. And she had not anticipated that eating breakfast with him at the kitchen table would feel like the most natural thing she had done in 3 years. She had not anticipated any of it, and she was a woman who prided herself on anticipating things. He began coming to the kitchen more often. Not every day. He had work, meetings, long phone calls that took him into the study for hours at a time. But on the days he was in the house, and not buried in the work, he appeared. Morning, usually, for coffee, occasionally in the afternoon, sometimes, on evenings when the day had been long, and the quiet of the estate had settled in around them both. He came and sat at the kitchen island, and talked while she cooked. He was not a man who talked easily. She understood this quickly. He chose words the way a man chooses where to step when the ground is uncertain, carefully, with weight behind each placement. He did not fill silence because it made him uncomfortable. He waited until he had something to say, and when he said it, it was worth hearing. She found that she liked this. She had spent years around people who talked to fill space, who spoke to reassure themselves that they were present, and she had developed a habit of patience with it that was not quite the same as enjoying it. Raymond's silences felt different. They were the silences of someone thinking, rather than someone absent, and she found she could sit in them comfortably, which surprised her. He told her one afternoon about the garden. Not the kitchen herb garden she had started, but the wider grounds, the formal beds that had been Claire's project for years. He talked about them the way people talk about things they have been not talking about for a long time, carefully at first, and then with more openness, as though the subject had been held under pressure and he was releasing it slowly to see what happened. Claire had planted roses along the east wall, 12 varieties, each one chosen for a specific reason she had explained to him and he had not always fully followed, but had listened to anyway, because she had loved explaining them. The roses had not been properly tended since spring. He was not sure what needed to be done. He did not know anything about roses. Rosa listened. She asked a question or two about what kind of care they had received before, what the conditions were like along the east wall, how much sun it got in the afternoon. He answered her questions. Then he said, carefully, looking at the table rather than at her, that it would bother him if they died. The roses, she said, then we won't let them die. He looked up at her. She met his eyes for a moment, then looked back at what she was doing. She meant the roses. She was aware that he heard something wider than the roses. She was aware that she might have meant something wider than the roses. She kept her hands moving. The following Saturday morning, they walked the east wall together. She looked at the rose beds, assessed what had gone untended and what had survived on its own, made notes. He walked beside her and pointed out which variety was which, repeating the names Claire had told him, with the careful pronunciation of a man who has memorized something important in a language that is not his own. Rosa listened, and nodded, and wrote in her small notebook. They were outside for almost 2 hours. When they came back in, he made the coffee. She had not asked him to. He simply went to the kitchen and made it, and brought 2 cups to the table, and they sat down, and she showed him the notes she had made about what the roses needed. He looked at the notes for a long time. Then he said, quietly, "She would have liked you." Rosa did not say anything immediately. She looked at the notes in her notebook, at the small, precise handwriting, at the list of rose varieties and their requirements. "Tell me about her," she said. He did. Not everything. Not all at once. But enough. Claire had been a schoolteacher before they married, had kept reading through all the years of the estate and the work and the life that required so much from her. She had been patient in a way Raymond was not and had never pretended to be. She had argued with him, which most people did not dare to do, and had been right often enough that he had stopped resisting it and started relying on it. She had loved the garden and music played too loud in the kitchen and Sunday mornings with no schedule. Rosa listened to all of it. She did not perform sympathy. She did not offer the gentle, practiced sounds of condolence that people offer when they want to acknowledge pain without getting close to it. She listened the way she listened to everything, fully, without editing it for her own comfort. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. She said, "She sounds like someone who knew what mattered." He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "Yes, she did." Something moved between them in that silence, something neither of them named. Rosa felt it and recognized it, and her stomach did the careful, cautious thing that stomachs do when you are standing at a height you have been at before and you remember what it felt like to fall. She picked up her notebook and said she needed to check on the afternoon laundry. He said, "Of course." She went. That evening she sat in her room for a long time, not reading, just sitting. She thought about Frank, about the cost of caring, about what it meant to let someone into the specific kind of space in your chest that is different from friendship and different from professional warmth, and has no polite, manageable name. She thought about who Raymond Conti was, not his history, which was complicated, and which she had chosen not to examine too closely, but who he was in this house, in this kitchen, at this table. A man who had loved his wife genuinely, and lost her, and gone very far inside himself from the grief of it. A man who was coming back, slowly, and who seemed to find the journey easier when she was nearby. She thought about what it would mean if she let this become something. She thought about what it would mean if she didn't. She opened her notebook to the page with the rose notes and read over them twice, though she had already memorized them. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, checked that the basil had enough water, turned off the light, and went to bed. She did not apply for other positions that night, which she had been doing intermittently since her second week at the estate, just in case, the way you keep an umbrella in your bag for weather that hasn't started yet. She told herself she would do it tomorrow. She did not do it tomorrow either. The rose beds along the east wall began to look better. She had found the right gloves in the garden shed and spent 2 afternoons clearing the beds, cutting back what needed cutting, feeding the soil with the compost she had started in a corner of the kitchen garden. Raymond appeared once while she was working, stood at a distance with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching. He did not interrupt. After a while he walked back to the house. She found, when she came in that afternoon, that he had made tea, 2 cups, on the kitchen table. She sat down and drank the tea, and he sat across from her, and they talked about nothing important for almost an hour, and Rosa Ferrante, who had kept very careful track of the line between her life and other people's lives for 3 solid years, felt it begin to blur in a way that was frightening and warm in equal measure. She kept her hands wrapped around the cup and did not say anything about the line. But she felt it. Every hour of every day she felt it. And she felt herself making a choice, in small increments, not to step back. The roses were blooming by late November, against all expectation. Because November was late and the weather had turned, 3 of the 12 varieties put out flowers. Small, stubborn things, in deep red and pale yellow. Not showy, not the full summer display they would make in June, but there, alive. Proof that something could come back from a long, quiet period of not being tended, and still have something left to give. Raymond came to the east wall early on a Saturday morning and stood looking at the flowers for a long time. Rosa was there too, a few feet away, checking the soil around the base of the plants. He did not say anything about the roses. He said, instead, without looking at her, "You didn't have to do all this." "I know," she said. "I noticed that you did it anyway." She looked up at him. His eyes were on the roses. "The work needed doing," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that all it was?" She looked back at the soil. Her hands were in the earth, and the earth was cold and honest, and she was 41 years old, and not interested in pretending. "No," she said. "It wasn't all it was." Neither of them said anything else. The morning held itself still around them. 3 roses, small and persistent in the November cold, moved slightly in the wind. Rosa went back to checking the soil. Raymond stood where he was. Both of them breathed the cold air and let the moment be what it was without trying to make it into something more manageable. It was the most honest conversation either of them had had in a very long time. The call came on a Monday. Rosa was in the kitchen when she heard the sound of a car on the gravel. She knew the sound of most cars that came to the estate. This one was heavier and faster than the usual, and it came through the gate with the particular aggression of someone who had not needed to wait long at it. She heard voices in the entrance hall. One of them was Margaret's, professional and controlled. The other was a man's, direct and clipped and carrying authority the way certain men carry it, as though they were born to be heard. Rosa did not go to look. She turned her attention back to the bread she was kneading, which had been working well and deserved her full attention. 20 minutes later, Margaret came to the kitchen doorway. Her expression was the particular kind of neutral that cost something to maintain. "Mr. Conti's son has arrived," she said. "From Milan. His name is Owen." "All right," Rosa said. "He'll be staying for a while." Margaret paused. "He tends to have opinions." Rosa looked at the bread dough. "Most people do," she said. Margaret nodded and left. Owen Conti was 42 years old, and built like a man who had grown up watching his father, and decided to be him, all the exterior without having done the work of becoming it yet. He had Raymond's height and something close to his directness, but where Raymond's directness was the economy of a man who had learned to mean what he said, Owens had the edge of someone who had learned to say things before others could say them first. He did not come to the kitchen on his first day. Rosa caught a glimpse of him in the corridor, on the phone, pacing with the focused energy of someone who was always in the middle of several things at once. He nodded at her the way he nodded at the furniture, registering her existence and filing it under not immediately relevant. She noted this and did not take it personally. She had worked in enough houses to know that the people who lived in them saw staff the way they saw good plumbing, comforting when it worked, noticeable only when it didn't. The dynamic changed on the third day. She heard him before she saw him. He was in the dining room with Raymond, and their voices were carrying through the wall, in the way that voices carry when two people are keeping them controlled, but only just. She could not make out the words, only the shape of the conversation, the low and steady tone of Raymond's voice, and the quicker, more insistent rhythm of Owen's. She made lunch, she set it out in the dining room when it was ready, knocked once to let them know, and left without interrupting. Over the following days she paid attention the way she always paid attention, not to gather information, but because she was good at reading the climate of a house, and the climate had shifted. Owen's presence created a new kind of tension in the estate, not the heavy, sad tension that had been there since she arrived, but something more active, something with edges. He noticed her more as the days passed. She could feel his assessments when she moved through rooms he was in, brief and measuring, the way a man calculates things he is uncertain about. She kept her manner even, and her work precise, and gave him nothing to calculate. On a Thursday afternoon, she was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Raymond was in his study, in a meeting that had been going for 2 hours. Owen came into the kitchen and stood in the doorway in a way that made it clear he intended to say something. She continued what she was doing. "How long have you been here?" he said. 6 weeks, she said. "And before this?" "Other positions, private households." He moved into the kitchen, not far, just far enough to establish that he was not hovering at the threshold. He was looking around the kitchen with the specific attention of someone taking inventory. "The staff turnover here has been significant," he said. 3 cooks in 4 months. "So I was told. What made you different?" She looked up from the cutting board and looked at him directly. "I didn't try to make your father do anything he wasn't ready to do." Owen looked at her for a moment. His expression did not change, but something behind it shifted, the way a drawer shifts when you push it slightly, and it has not quite been closed properly. "He seems better," Owen said. There was something in the words that was not quite a concession and not quite a challenge, something between the two. "He's been eating regularly for 4 weeks, she said. "I noticed." A pause. "I also noticed that he seems comfortable here, in the kitchen, specifically." Rosa waited. Owen looked at the pot on the stove, at the herb garden in the window, at the general state of a kitchen that was clearly being looked after. His jaw moved slightly, the way someone's jaw moves when they are forming, and then choosing not to say a particular thing. Then he said it anyway. "Some people can mistake a man's loneliness for something else," he said. His voice was even, almost conversational. "They see an opening. They make themselves useful in ways that are difficult to argue with. And before anyone realizes what's happening, lines have been moved that probably shouldn't have been moved." The kitchen was very quiet. Rosa set down the knife she was holding, slowly, without hurry. She looked at Owen Conti, and she did not let any of what she was feeling into her face, because her face was her own business, and she chose what went on it. "That's an interesting thing to say to someone who has been making your father's meals," she said. "I'm not interested in interesting," Owen said. "I'm interested in clear." "Then I'll be clear," Rosa said. "I came here to do a job. I have done that job. Your father's health is better. The house is running well. Whatever interpretation you want to put on that is your business." She picked the knife back up. "Is there something specific you need from the kitchen?" Owen looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "No," and left. Rosa stood still for a moment, after he was gone. The cutting board was in front of her, and her hands were on it, and the vegetable she had been cutting was still there, half done, waiting. She finished it. She finished all of it. She made dinner. Good dinner. The kind that required her whole attention, and that was what she gave it. She did not go to Raymond. She did not report the conversation. She had not come to this house to create complications, and she was not going to start now. What she did was sit in her room that evening and feel the full weight of what Owen had said. Not because it had been cruel, though it had been, in the precise way that things aimed accurately are cruel, but because underneath the cruelty was a question that she had been asking herself for weeks. What are you doing here, Rosa? Not here in the estate. Here in this space that had grown up between her and Raymond Conti, warm and unplanned. The space where they drank tea and talked about roses and sat in the kitchen at night, while the house was quiet, and were more honest with each other than she had been with anyone since Frank. What did she think that was? What did she think it was going to become? She was a housekeeper. He was a man whose life had dimensions and complications she had no full picture of, and she was sensible enough to know that the part of his life that she saw was not the whole of it. She saw the grief and the quiet, and the man who was learning to eat again. There were other versions of Raymond Conti that she had not been shown and had not asked about. She was a 41-year-old woman with a canvas bag and a worn paperback and a potted basil plant, working in someone else's house. The east wall was not her garden. The kitchen table was not her table. And yet she had told him no when he said, "Is that all it was?" She had said no, clearly, in the cold morning air with her hands in the dirt. She had meant it. And she had known, saying it, that it was not only a description of the present, but a step toward something else, and she had taken the step anyway. She sat for a long time. Then she went to the kitchen, because the bread she had left to prove needed checking, and the bread did not care about her uncertainties. The next morning, Raymond found out what Owen had said. She still did not know who told him. Perhaps Margaret, who saw everything in the house and exercised careful judgment about what to do with what she saw. Perhaps one of the other staff, who had been in the corridor at the right moment. It did not matter. What mattered was that at 9 in the morning, she heard voices from the study, not carried through the wall this time but fully audible. Raymond's voice in a register she had not heard before. Not loud. Raymond was rarely loud, but stripped of the usual control. Low and direct and final in the way that only things said without the option of being argued with are final. Owen's responses were shorter. Shorter and shorter as the conversation went on. At 10:15, she heard the front door. At 10:20, she heard the car on the gravel, moving fast. At 10:30, Raymond came into the kitchen. He looked at her, and she looked at him. She was making bread again. Her hands were in the dough again, which seemed to be where she always was when things happened in this house. He did not sit down. He stood on the other side of the island and looked at her with an expression that she could not fully read, except that it was not composed, not the held-back, carefully measured face he usually showed the world. He said, "You're not leaving." It was 3 words, and they contained a great deal more than 3 words. She looked at the dough. Her hands pressed into it, turned it, pressed again. "I know," she said. He stood there for another moment. Then he said, "I should have known what he'd said before this morning." "It's all right," she said. "It isn't." He paused. "But it will be." She looked up at him. He was looking at her the way he had looked at the roses on the east wall that Saturday morning, when he had asked her if the work had been all it was. The same directness, the same waiting. She said, "Make the coffee." He blinked, just slightly. Then something moved across his face that was close to a smile, which she had not seen before, and which changed his whole face in a way she was not fully prepared for. He made the coffee. They sat at the kitchen table and drank it, and neither of them said very much. But the kitchen felt different than it had felt before Owen arrived. It felt cleared, the way a room feels cleared after a window has been opened, and the stale air has moved out, and something cleaner has come in to take its place. Outside, the east wall was there, and the roses on it, and the cold November sky above them, and all of it still needing attention, all of it still growing, all of it still worth the work. It was Raymond who changed first, and he would have argued this, but he would have been wrong. He changed because Rosa had given him something to come back for, not to her, not precisely, or not only, but to the act of living as a daily, specific, inhabited thing, rather than an obligation to be endured. He came back to breakfast, and to the east wall garden, and to the sound of someone in the kitchen on a slow Sunday morning. He came back to hunger, which sounds small, and is in fact enormous, because hunger is what the body says when it has decided to continue. He came back to paying attention to the day, to the particular quality of winter light through the kitchen window at 7 in the morning, to the way the thyme Rosa had planted smelled when you ran a finger along the stem, to the difference between a Tuesday that had something good in it and a Tuesday that did not, a distinction he had lost the ability to make and had not known he missed until he could make it again. He worked. His business had not stopped during his grief, and had not simplified, and Raymond dealt with it with the same precision he always had, because the precision was built into him, was not something that grief could entirely excavate. But he noticed, over the weeks of Rosa being in the house, that he dealt with the work differently now, not less seriously, but with a quality of separation from it that he had not had before, a slight, useful distance between the work and the whole of who he was, so that when the work was difficult, and it was often difficult, he was not pulled entirely into the difficulty. He thought about this one evening in the study, sitting with a glass of water he had not touched yet, and he understood it clearly for the first time. For 30 years, the work had been everything, partly because it had needed to be, partly because he had let it be, because having the work be everything was convenient in ways that were easy to justify. And Claire had always been there, the other side of the balance, the thing that the work did not eat. And when she died, there had been only the work, and the work had not been enough. And without Claire there to be the other side, he had not known who he was when the work was not happening. Rosa was not Claire. He had never, not for a moment, tried to make her into Claire. They were entirely different people, and he held no confusion about this. What Rosa was the first person in 4 months who had shown him that there was a life happening around him that was worth being in. Not by telling him so, by simply being in it herself, fully, with her attention, and her capable hands, and her absolute refusal to be managed or diminished or made small. He found himself thinking about her at times that had nothing to do with her, in the middle of a phone call, at his desk reading through documents, early in the morning before he got up, not obsessively, not the way a man thinks about something he can't have, the way you think about a source of light when you are in a room that has one. He did not know what to do with this, which was unfamiliar to him. Raymond Conti was a man who knew what to do with things. What he did was continue. He came to the kitchen, he ate the food she made, he sat at the table, he talked and listened in turn. He made the coffee sometimes, which he had not done for anyone in years, and he did it with the small, quiet satisfaction of a man who has found something he wants to do for a specific person. On a Saturday in December, he asked her to go with him to the market, not as staff, as company. She looked at him when he asked, direct, as she always was. To buy what? She said. Whatever you need for the kitchen, he said, and whatever else looks good. She considered this for a moment. Then she untied her apron and went to get her coat. They drove to the market together in his car, which was a plain dark saloon, not what people imagined when they thought of Raymond Conti, but which was what he actually drove. Because he had always found conspicuousness exhausting, the market was a weekly outdoor one in the town, with produce and bread and a butcher at the far end who did things right. Rosa moved through the stalls with the authority of a woman who knows exactly what she is looking at and why. She touched things, smelled things, made decisions quickly. Raymond walked beside her and carried the bags, which he did without comment, because it was the obvious and useful thing to do, and he had never required tasks to announce their own significance. People noticed him. They always noticed him in public, the slight shift of awareness that moved through a space when Raymond Conti entered it. Rosa noticed them noticing. She did not adjust her behavior in response. She stopped at a stall with late-season vegetables and spoke to the old woman running it about the quality of the parsnips this year, and Raymond stood at her shoulder, and the world arranged itself around them, and she did not seem to find any of this remarkable. He found this extraordinary. He had never been with a person in public who simply continued being themselves regardless of the atmosphere his presence created. Most people either avoided him or performed for him. Rosa did neither. She bought the parsnips, decided against the turnips, and moved on. He bought her coffee from a stall at the edge of the market. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked out at the square. He stood beside her and thought, I have no idea how to do this. He had not had to do this in 23 years, had not had to find his way toward a person from the beginning, with the uncertainty of beginning, with the knowledge that the first step might be wrong and might not be recoverable. With Claire, it had been different. With Claire, it had been a long time ago, and he had been a different kind of man, less cautious, not yet worn to this precise shape. He was aware of the gap between what he wanted to say and what he was capable of saying on a Saturday morning at a market with coffee cups in hand. He said, I'm glad you didn't leave. She looked at him sideways. The December light was flat and cold and honest. I nearly did, she said. A few times. I know. You knew? He looked ahead. You're not hard to read. You're just quiet about what you're reading in yourself. She was quiet for a moment. That might be the most accurate thing anyone has said to me in years. Tell me what kept you. She held her coffee. Around them, the market was busy. Voices and footsteps, and the clink of things being set out and sold. She said, the roses needed finishing, and I don't like leaving things half done. He looked at her. She was looking out at the square, and there was the slight movement at the corner of her mouth that was close to a smile, but had not committed to being one yet. The roses, he said. And other things, she said, which was as close as either of them was going to get to the full truth on a Saturday morning, and which was enough. They finished their coffee. They went back through the market and bought bread from the baker at the far end. Good bread, the kind with a thick crust and a texture that held up to things. Raymond carried the bags and Rosa navigated, and they moved through the crowd as though they had been doing this for years, which they had not, but which their bodies had apparently decided to pretend. On the drive back, she told him what she was going to make with the parsnips. He listened, and through the window the winter fields moved past, and he thought about the kitchen waiting at the end of the drive, and the table that had 2 places at it now without anyone having to be asked, and the basil plant in the window that was not dying, that had refused consistently to die under her care, and he thought, this is what it feels like to be here. He had forgotten. He was glad to have been reminded. That evening, after dinner, they sat in the kitchen for a long time. No particular task, no purposeful conversation. Rosa had a book, he had papers he had carried in, and not opened. The kitchen was warm, and the outside was dark, and the estate was quiet, in the way it used to be quiet when things were good in it. A full quiet, rather than an empty one. At some point he put the papers down and looked at her. She was reading. Her face was relaxed in the way faces only relax when a person genuinely forgets they are being seen, and there was something in the line of her jaw and the way she held the book that he found himself wanting to be near for a very long time. He said her name. Just that. She looked up. He said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can answer honestly without it changing anything. She closed her book. Go ahead. Are you happy here? She looked at him for a long moment. The question sat between them, simple and not simple at all. The kind of question that is asking several things at once, and they both knew it. Yes, she said. I am. He nodded. He picked his papers back up but did not read them. She opened her book, but did not read it either. Outside, the December wind moved through the estate, and the roses on the east wall held on to what they had, because that was the kind of roses they were, the stubborn, persistent kind that had been chosen for exactly that reason. And the house sat on its 12 acres in the dark, with 2 people in its kitchen, who were not saying everything they meant, but were saying enough. Spring was a month away, and the roses would be fuller then, and the herb garden would expand, and the kitchen table would still have 2 places at it in the morning, and Raymond Conti would eat breakfast like a man who had somewhere to be and someone to be near, and Rosa Ferrante would water the basil and plan the kitchen garden and stay, not because the work required it, because she wanted to. And she had learned, slowly and at considerable cost, that wanting something was not the same as losing yourself to it, that you could want something and still be fully who you were, that love, if that was what this was becoming, did not have to mean the disappearance of Rosa Ferrante into someone else's life. She was still here. She was still herself. The basil was still on the windowsill. And the man across the table from her was still here too, which 4 months ago had not been certain in the ways that mattered, and was now more certain every day. That was enough to begin with. That was, in fact, everything.